Oksana, please.
Excellent. Well, I would like to greet everyone who is joining us today. Welcome to our discussion. I'm, as always, very excited to hold these sessions because they're always very informative, very enlightening. And of course, we've got a wonderful expert with us who is not for the first time with us, Chris Whyte, who is expert and, this veteran entrepreneur as well as a pioneer of sustainability and circular economy, as well as like waste and recycling, founder of various foundations. Chris, you will tell about yourself, yeah, once you will get to it, yeah, and. Because your list of accomplishments is incredibly extensive. Of course, your focus is your focus is definitely on helping the planet. Yeah, more. And I know that those people who, were really passionate, they do start with waste, right? Waste recycling, a lot of things. But and then, of course, there is an important part of the sustainability is energy, and this is, of course, our main focus. And I'm sure that you will also be touching on that, as all of the players in sustainability sector are quite uncertain and definitely affected by turbulence and changes that are taking place in the politics, in geopolitics, and legislation that affects economies, right? And then, of course, economics of and profitability of projects. So, so this is to our audience. We kind of caught up with Chris and say, okay, well, what should we talk about? And we both said, I think we should address the elephant in the room. We should talk about the topic that really concerns everyone at the moment is how to make money and how to kind of maintain prosperity and drive growth in times of turbulence, in times of uncertainty. So Chris is very kind of like very broad strategic thinker, takes one great macro view, who will kind of step back and give you a great perspective. I'm also looking forward to be enlightened as always by Chris. In the meantime, very quickly, for those who don't know us, we are QPQ International, a platform and advisory focused on helping green energy projects get funding. We support developers with debt or equity. We are a team of 35 people, and with main focus in US, Europe, primarily Europe, US, Canada, but then of course we also have projects in other emerging markets that support green energy transition. We're very strong with our kind of funding capabilities, have very broad investor base, ranging from leading private equity infrastructure funds to sovereign funds, and IPPs. Very confident in our ability to structure deals. And then, of course, it's not an easy business landscape right now. So our kind of very strong investor network that consists of 720 leading investors kind of give us edge, put it this way, in helping developers. So we pride ourselves in having this wonderful community and giving back with our dialogue and wonderful kind of expertise in the representation of Chris and the likes. And yes, and thank you very much for being part of our journey. Thank you very much for attending. If you are a developer and you have a good project, please do share it with us. As I said, we always make sure that you have options and you get, best possible terms. And QPQ stands for quid pro quo. This been thrashed and destroyed, this term, since that's why we don't really say it very often. We kind of abbreviated it. But really, in the terms, it's about fairness. It's about fair exchange, So we always tend to ensure that our investors get really good deals and good investments, and as well as our developers get good money for their projects. So that's it for me, Vlad. Do you want to talk about
Yes,
some?
definitely. I just wanted to add to what you said in terms of I will be sharing some useful links for you guys to be able to submit your projects either directly to my email or through our funding accelerator. I'll be sharing, of course, Chris's and our presentation, so you have it, and you can study it later as well. I'll be sharing some other links in terms of referral program that we have and our deal advisory program. So you can all find it in the chat section. You can download the presentations. As for the questions, as for the Q&A, we will always have last 10-15 minutes dedicated specifically to questions that we have and the audience will have. So please post your questions through Q&A feature that Zoom has, not through chat. Chat doesn't, it's not enabled. So Q&A is where you post questions. As you can post it anytime as Chris goes through his presentation, and we'll address it in the end. So please remember to do that. Remember to share the questions. Otherwise, I think it's all pretty straightforward. Thank you very much, Chris, for making yourself available. Great to have you with us again, and great to see so many people joining. So let's get started. We will be on the background. If you need anything, Chris, you just let us know, and I'll pop back on stage. All right. You can unmute. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. So first thing I need to ask is if you can see my screen on full screen.
Yes,
I can
perfect.
see you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Marvelous. Thank you. And again, thank you QPQ for the opportunity to try and share some of my insights. Obviously, in terms of any presentation, there are interpretations, obviously, from an individual perspective, and those are not necessarily shared by everybody else. But I tend to, as you get older and grumpier like myself, you tend to just tell the truth and get on with it. So really what we're talking about today is trying to understand this balance. There's a lot of turbulence going on. There's a lot of noise. Where are we going? What's happening in terms of sustainability? So for your information, my name is Chris Whyte. I am an international consultant. I've been at this for 35 years, looking at sustainability, green, circular, sustainability, all the other different green terms that come into that. And I've been involved mostly in Africa. I have business in Europe and the States as well, but mostly in Africa. But really looking at circularity and circular economy across all the different sectors. And that really does not mean, again, that circular economy is about waste and waste recycling. That is a misnomer. We tend to see a lot of understanding or misrepresentation of circular economy as a buzzword for recycling. It's anything but. It's actually a systemic, dynamic perspective of transitioning economies. And really, QPQ has always been a good partner and understanding that, again, it's about the economy, it's about the money. It's called circular economy. It's not called circular economic development, or it's not called circular environment or circular social development. It's called circular economy. And it really is about trying to find that focus in terms of the reality of the world, in terms of what greases the wheels is money, and it is about making sure that things make economic sense. So with the current turmoil, I'm going to try and lead you down a path of despair and dismay, but then hopefully lead you at the end towards a little bit of light that will indicate kind of where we are going. So I see there's some chats popping up. I'm not keeping an eye on that because I don't have the opportunity of doing that while I'm presenting.
Don't worry.
And I'll
it's just me posting the useful links and the presentation, so it's for everyone to download. Yeah, I'll be managing the chat. I'll be managing the questions, so you focus on the presentation.
Great stuff. Good stuff. All right, so let's get cracking with this. I think that the first thing we really want to try and look at is the elephant in the room. And a couple of things that I do. One is that I was Executive Director of the African Circular Economy Network up until December last year. I'm currently Business Development Advisor as I move towards my own focus areas on practical project development. But I'm also still a director of ASIN Foundation, which is soon to rebrand itself as Africa Circular. And there are critical issues in terms of looking at development and aid across Africa, and there are ripples and they are painful. And what we are seeing is that literally the last few meetings that I've had is all about understanding what is the impact of this across Africa. So we're starting to see these issues. When we start to look at the withdrawal of the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, that's in massive ripples, particularly across the global south, where a lot of this funding does find its way. And USAID funding covers a whole host of different components, from political and social and administrative components through into looking at issues around agriculture, infrastructure, education, etc. But there's been a huge slash. And to be honest, I think that some of it I can possibly understand. But it's not all of it. It's 30 to 50%. That means that we still have 50 to 70% of that funding is still available. And what they're doing is just being a little bit more directed in terms of where that money is being put. What that does mean is that we have a whole host of NGOs and companies scrambling at the moment because the pot is getting smaller and the competition for that is getting greater. But we need to just put that into perspective, and again understand that when we're looking at that funding, that it is 30 to 50% of $30 billion a year. It sounds like a huge amount of money. It is a huge amount of money. But again, how is that going to affect investment into different sectors, particularly in terms of the sustainability sectors? Now, myself, perhaps like most of you, might have been watching our shares over the last few days nervously. I'm in South Africa. We're being picked on directly by the Trump administration. Some of it for good reason. And again, I'm not going to argue the merits or dismerits of that. But the reality is that the rand has collapsed. It's gone to its worst level in 18 months. Which is problematic for many. Obviously, I earn mostly in euros and dollars, so I'm actually getting an increase. So one's got to put things into perspective and look for the silver lining. But it is going to be tragic in terms of the way this is going. And understanding this is supposed to be looking at the implementation in terms of reciprocal tariffs. And reciprocal, again, coming back to the terminology, QPQ is quid pro quo. Which could be very much aligned to something like the term reciprocal. But these are not reciprocal. I have no idea how they've made their calculations. I've studied mathematics, I've studied statistics. I'm still not too sure where these numbers have come from, but we're seeing the ripples of these internationally. And that is going to have a massive effect on the global economy going forward. And we need to really understand how this is coming forward. So I'm not going to describe the merits or dismerits of this particular strategy, tragedy, whatever you want to call it. It really is just trying to understand where it's coming from. I have no problem with reciprocal tariffs. And if I'm being charged 10% by my bank for my interest, I would like to get 10% back from the bank in terms of what I get back. So that you're not losing. And ultimately, what we're looking at is a system where there aren't winners and losers. I think the system we're looking at the moment definitely has winners and losers, but we'll see how that pans out. I think all comments on that are for individual consumption. So are the positives of this change? I mean, there's reasons behind it. So, Trump's talking now recently about this $6 trillion boom in terms of big investors coming into America, and they're also looking at a number of different policies to fast track investments, $1 billion plus investments into the US. They're fast tracking particular visas in terms of people who bring in value and economic benefit and business owners. So there's a positive and a negative to everything, and again, it depends on how you want to try and put this. From my perspective, the little picture in the bottom right is Donald Trump puckering up. I don't know where he's puckering up to. I'll leave that up to you to make your own decisions. So, is this just Trump really being nasty, or is this a reality of the world that we're living in? And the simple reality is that whilst the rest of the world and the left-wing media and mainstream media are really pumping down on how bad this is, the rest of the world is quietly jumping on the bandwagon. And what we're seeing is a massive decrease in foreign development funding and investment across the board, across Europe. With a few exceptions. I think if you look at Norway, is pretty much keeping things the same as is Italy. But if you look at the likes of the United Kingdom, I mean, they've dropped their reduction of 0.5% of the GNI to 0.3% of the GNI, which is about £6 billion a year, and that's not to be sneezed at. But when you start to add in the elements from the other countries, including Finland, Switzerland, Germany, France, collectively, the amount of money that's being drained out of the system is way more than what's actually happening with USAID. So this is causing massive ripples. And while everybody's pointing fingers at Trump, I think everyone's gone, "Ooh, here's a great idea. Let's follow suit." While in the noise that's going out there, pretty much everyone else is doing the same sort of thing. And this is creating a massive level of uncertainty, and particularly in the circles that I run in, which is understanding or talking about sustainability, looking at how we move the world forward in a way that is not going to destroy the population or the species of mankind. But at the same time, being able to look at the realities and requirements in terms of a growing population and the needs of consumers and the requirements to grow economies. So there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of uncertainty out there. But the reality is that we need to try and filter through what the negatives are. So if we look about things like the climate agreement, we all know that Donald Trump and the USA have pulled out of or withdrawn from the Paris Climate Agreement. And everyone's going, "Oh, he's the bad guy." But is this really looking or signaling a global change away from climate change and sustainability? And I don't think so. I don't think so at all. So if you look at the graph to the right, realistically, what's happened over the last decade is that this commitment has really been entrenched across a number of different countries, and we're seeing really respective reduction emissions compared to 2005 levels in the majority of European countries. And that includes UK, which is not in this one as well. But the reality is that there's a lot of very positive commitment to continuing that. As of today, the 8th of April, 2025, there are 195 parties. One of those parties is the European Union, incorporating all these countries that you see in the graph to the right, which are still part of the Paris Climate Agreement. And this really represents a near universal commitment to addressing climate change. So when we look at the big bad boys in the room, we've got Russia and China and America and everything else. We need to look at where the positives are. And I think that's ideally one of the things we need to focus on. And rather than just saying, well, the world's going to end and whenever everything's going to go to, what's it in the pot, we need to just put it into perspective. And understanding that really is trying to address what we're looking at there with regards to those commitments. So if you look at the European countries and committed to the Paris Climate Agreement, regardless of the USA withdrawal. Sorry, just excuse me, I'm moving my screen around because I keep getting the share part and halfway on my screen here. So despite the US withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement under Trump, there is a strong commitment to climate goals. The EU and the individual nations have set ambitious targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and transition to a sustainable climate neutral economy. Now, for those of you who would be interested, my background is actually in geology. So to be honest with you, I think that we really have picked on carbon dioxide as the monster in the room unfairly. I think there's nothing wrong with carbon dioxide. It's 0.04% of the atmosphere. It really has triggered a number of different components across geological time, but we are very much narcissistic as a population in terms of saying, well, this is all human intervention, and there is a human intervention to that. However, whilst I'm not really a big promoter or in favor of understanding climate change according to carbon dioxide, there is no doubt that climate change is happening. And if I look at what's we're seeing across the globe in terms of biodiversity loss, overfishing, over urbanization, deforestation, looking at all these different components, there's absolutely no question that we're looking at climate change being exacerbated through human influence. If we want to call carbon dioxide the bad boy, let's do that, because what it does do is it gives us a figure to measure. And that really is where we need to look at that from the perspective of understanding how that fits into looking at finances. Whether you believe those are good or bad, let's leave that again for personal interpretation. But when we look at those different commitments, let's first of all look at the European Green Deal. And really, they're saying that we're going to make the EU climate neutral by 2050. And that means net zero greenhouse gas emissions. So there's some key policies in that, including phasing out fossil fuel, looking at expanding renewable energy in its different forms under the conventional term, as well as looking at energy improvements in buildings and transport, and also looking at the ETS, or the emissions trading system, carbon pricing through that initiative. The second part of that is really looking at the 2030 climate targets, and these have increased. So originally the EU aimed for a 40% reduction again versus 1990 levels by 2030. And the update in 2023 is that they're targeting at least 55%. And that's this new Fit for 55 package. And it really is indicative of the traction that countries have made in terms of achieving this. And I think it's all in the right spectrum. It's in the right realm, and it's for the right reasons. Some countries are actually exceeding that. So some have very, very aggressive national goals, such as Germany, Sweden, and Denmark. But if we look at, if we look at the, trying to hide my sidebars all over the place. If we look at the third one here, is looking at renewable energy and efficiency, and the target there from EU Energy in terms of renewables is currently at 42.5%, which was 32%. So there's an increase in terms of looking at driving renewable energy and energy efficiency. And the energy efficiency improvements in terms of reduction in energy consumption is also looking at about 11.7%. So there's a critical area around that too. If you look at the fourth commitment, which is phasing out of internal combustion engines or ICE vehicles, again, here I do a lot of work on issues around electronic waste and understanding critical raw materials. So, you know, are there good and bads in terms of rollouts of EVs? Absolutely. But effectively, there's this big push in terms of banning new petrol or diesel or combustion engine vehicles by 2035. Again, the problem with that is these policies are really technology agnostic. And I think anybody who knows systems in terms of where we are, excuse me, if you read the news by Toyota, for example, if you look at some of the new system combustion engines that are coming through, are probably going to knock EV systems out of the ballpark. And there are new systems in terms of looking at hydrogen and hybrid systems that are constantly being innovated. So it might be a little bit short-sighted in terms of saying petrol and diesel. Might be the better way of saying it rather than combustion engine. Anyway, some countries actually have earlier deadlines. So if you look at Norway is saying by this year, they're going to have a complete ban, and Netherlands by 2030. One of the big things that we're looking at in terms of really driving this, and we're feeling these ripples throughout the global south, is what we call CBAM, or the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanisms. And that really is a tariff on carbon-intensive imports, looking at steel, cement, metals, etc., to prevent what they call carbon leakage, and that encourages global climate action. CBAM is really linked into a number of different policies, and what we're seeing, even as far down here as South Africa, we're seeing that farmers who export products to Europe are having to look very closely at their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions to ensure that they meet CBAM requirements to make sure that their products have a viable market into Europe. So these are elements that are stuck and really entrenched in policy, and we really need to make sure that we understand these things aren't going to change very quickly. So whilst we have these little ripples that are going on at the moment, we need to take a look at the long term and understand what is going on there. So just excuse me, I've had flu this week, so if I had the odd cough, please excuse me. The sixth policy, or the sixth commitment, is the individual country commitments. And there's a whole host of ranges across there. I mean, Germany is looking at being climate neutral by 2045 with 80% renewable energy by 2030. And they're doing pretty well in terms of those commitments. France is looking at bans on fossil fuels by 2040. Again, looking at nuclear expansion. And the UK, obviously not EU, but they're still committed. Net zero by 2050 and 100% clean electricity by 2035. I think that might be a little bit optimistic, but that's 10 years down the line, if you think about it. And the Nordic countries, some Nordic countries are aiming for net zero before 2050. So when we start to look at where we are there, that really brings in the last commitment, which is that there's continued support for the Paris Climate Agreement. The EU and its member states remain in the Paris Agreement, and they're pushing for stronger global climate action. Whether you believe in climate change or carbon or whatever it might be, the reality is that what we're looking at is a good process going forward, because it's better for the planet, it's better for the long-term sustainability of mankind on this planet. And many European leaders are criticizing US's withdrawal on the first Trump administration and now the new one, but are maintaining their own commitments. So whilst we're seeing a move away from development aid, we're not seeing a move away from the Paris Agreement and climate agreements. The development aid is also an interesting dynamic, and we've discussed this at a number of different fora across the African diaspora in terms of some of the things we've been discussing. And to be honest, I think that we can also look internally and say, well, you know, there's been an awful lot of consultants getting rich on international aid and funding. And a lot of funding agents are saying we want to come back and focus on projects. We need measurable, verifiable data that shows the impact of the funding that's coming from the north to the south. And I have no problem with that. I think that there needs to be accountability, there needs to be transparency. And I think that will knock out, you know, a large portion of NGOs that operate across the area, simply because I think that they've been on a free meal ticket for a long time. But if it's driving things towards proper project development on the ground, then I have to agree with that. And again, that's my opinion, might not be the opinion of QPQ or any of yourselves, but I think that everything happens for a reason, and we always need to look at where the positives are in them. And I think that realignment in terms of some of the initiatives we're looking at really is about saying, how do we understand this dynamic and rather look at where those opportunities are for commitment? So in conclusion, from this perspective, European countries are not backing down. It is leading with binding legislation, investments, and climate diplomacy that are ensuring long-term sustainability regardless of other nations' positions. So let's put the wobbles aside. Let's look at the bigger picture. Let's ensure that we follow this through and understand that there are opportunities in diversity. Why is it not changing? Here we go. So, oops, apologies, trigger finger. So there's a saying that the more things change, the more they stay the same. And this really means that despite surface level changes, the fundamental aspects of underlying realities often remain constant. And that's where, you know, what I'm trying to get across here is that we need to put this into perspective. And most countries in the world still have these commitments. And if you look at the 195 parties to the Paris Climate Agreement, that's not going to change anytime soon. There is still commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals, the achievement of which is somewhat underwhelming at the moment. And I think there's a requirement to ensure that we meet a lot more of those. And there are a lot of good strategies in terms of driving that. And a lot of that can be directed towards funding and project development that will help achieve the goals of the SDGs. Similarly, what we're looking at now in terms of my field is circular economy transition. And if you look at the numbers in terms of how circular we are as a planet, I think the latest figures that came out for 2023, 2024 was that the globe is 7.2% circular. So we've got a long way to go to be a little bit more resource efficient and manage our resources better. Part of that also is that there's massive commitment to ESG reporting, environmental and social governance reporting. And that includes looking at things like scope 1, 2, and 3 emission reductions and understanding all the different components around transparent ESG reporting. And that really has been exacerbated by the following point, which is looking at the alignment to the International Financial Reporting Standards and the development of the International Sustainability Standards Board. Those really are pushing for transparency, measurement, and verification in terms of ESG reporting. And I think that makes absolute sense. And again, any of you who've heard some of my previous talks will understand that globally, from a financial perspective, a lot of the ratings agencies have tagged onto the ISSB to ensure that a lot of these commitments are coming through in terms of meeting the goals of sustainability and climate change going forward. Again, commitment to the Paris Climate Agreement, we've gone through that in some detail. But there's also each of those different parties have what we call nationally determined contributions. I always laugh about these, the NDCs, because particularly in Africa, and I think possibly in a lot of Europe as well, is that our politicians go swanning over to these international conferences, and with their limited technical knowledge, go and start signing off agreements that they're going to do this, that, and the next thing without really understanding how they're going to do that. I think particularly for Africa, if we look at the achievement of the NDCs to date since the Paris Climate Agreement, I think they're pretty abysmal, and we've got a long way to go. But the reality is that those commitments are there, and these are reviewed every 5 years as well. And so there's a lot of science coming behind us now, and that really is getting better. There's a better understanding of how we achieve these NDCs and how do we look at our emission reductions, and really look at this from the perspective of the global climate efforts. And then finally, of course, again, is that CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, and that really will put a fair price on carbon emissions. So products moving across borders really is to try and level that playing field between EU and non-EU products and producers and encourage cleaner production worldwide. Is it fair? Perhaps not. I mean, the simple reality is that if you look at Africa as a developing nation who's sitting with all the resources in the world to power themselves up, which might not be seen as exactly renewable or green, are being pushed back not to go fossil fuel and not to go this way, which is where basically industrialization and Europe has got to over the last 200 years at the expense of Africa's resources. So is it fair? No, it's not fair. But is it right? Yes, I think we want to try and avoid the mistakes of the past. So let's look at trying to see that this is going to move forward. And there's really no indication that any of this is changing, regardless of a few people withdrawing from it or not complying. So in essence, the short message is that regardless of the global wobbles, the time really is now to invest in sustainable project developments. There are literally thousands of economically viable opportunities for investment where good profits can be made, and we can still achieve positive impacts and outcomes for people and the planet. And I'm not going to try and go through, I've got a few leading slides here which detail some of the ones that I've been investigating, but waste management is a massive opportunity in terms of unpacking the value and the opportunity of the resources that we're throwing away. Even in Europe, which is claiming to be well managed, a lot of that's going to waste to energy, which really is not exactly circular or green. So there's a lot of opportunity in terms of managing those resources that could bring greater value. There's forestry, which is a key one again. This doesn't seem to be a problem in Europe, and that's because, again, from a different social perspective, the pressure isn't there. But if you come to Africa, we have 4.4 million hectares of deforestation a year, which is 3 times worse than the rate of deforestation in the Amazon. And everyone keeps talking about the Amazon. So Africa is really in a much worse position. And largely that's because 60 to 70% of our population consistently rely on charcoal as the primary source of energy. 650 million people across the continent don't have access to electricity. So like QPQ have been saying, their focus is energy. There's a massive market opportunity in Africa, and energy is a critical component going forward. Agriculture, in the same way, there's huge opportunities in terms of creating regenerative agriculture. We need to feed this growing population. We're going to be putting 1.2 billion extra people onto the continent of Africa in the next 30 to 40 years. How are we going to feed all those people? And then looking at that from the perspective of, again, understanding health and education within agriculture, because one needs to look at it that we cannot continue to look at large-scale monocropping with chemical fertilizers and herbicides and pesticides. I think we're all aware of the health impacts of that that are now becoming well known to most. Mobility is a key driver as well. If one looks at global emissions, mobility is a massive one. That's a car, but we're talking about all mobility, ships, rail, etc. And I think that's sorry, that's my timer that I'm finished on time. So there's a number of different options in mobility. As I said, there's investment options into alternatives. There's a lot of new combustion engines that are coming through. There's a lot of hydrogen options. There's a lot of other different innovations coming through. Again, innovation, science, technology, innovation is a very exciting place to be. Roads and infrastructure, again, we're putting in massive infrastructure based on virgin materials. And yet we have the science, the knowledge, and the know-how already that we can actually do that from waste materials, from mining slag, mine tailings, and fly ash that are stronger, better, and cheaper and less carbon intensive than most. Manufacturing offers a huge amount of options in terms of greening. There's a big push at the moment in terms of green steel, and that really is taking fossil-based energy production of steel and metals into a hydrogen-based system. Each has their own ups and downs, but the lesser of two evils is definitely the way that we need to go in terms of ensuring that we make sure the resources of the planet last for generations to come. And mining is a critical one at the moment. Critical raw materials are absolutely essential. If we look at this drive on EVs, the mining houses are rubbing their hands in glee because we're going to need more lithium, we're going to need more copper, we're going to need more aluminium, we're going to need more iron. Mining is ramping up rapidly, and the mining houses are slapping their hands in glee. So there's different opportunities there in terms of looking at with metals and other critical raw materials. And again, some superb opportunities around innovation and applications. Construction of the built environment is another one. We're saying 39% of all carbon emissions come from the built environment. Yet we have opportunities in terms of innovation and new products and new building materials that will allow us to take a better path. Water is another critical one. Africa specifically, I mean, Africa holds 9% of the globe's freshwater resources, and yet we're really not treating it very well. And I think the opportunity there is to look at sustainable and critical paths to looking at water security and water quality provision. And then the big one is energy, because regardless of where we're going, there's going to be more people, there's going to be more stuff, we need more energy. But let's try and do that in the best way possible. And, each of these things has its own option. If you look at we're busy working on the small island developing states at the moment. And the simple reality is you don't have space to put down. You need 10,000 square meters for a megawatt of solar power, on land that is a high value because of its tourism value, on beaches. You can't use that land. So there's limitations in terms of what can be done. You don't want to put up big wind turbines on these beautiful idyllic islands because you've got this nasty visual thing in front of you. So there's different alternatives. There are alternative energy systems. And some of those are pretty exciting. I mean, we're talking about one at the moment now, which is a megawatt of power per 400 square meters, which is really dynamic. And baseload power 24/7 without any waste materials. And that's where innovation and technology is going. And we need to understand, we need to grasp those opportunities going forward and see how we take these things forward. So I'm going to end it there. As I said, I did have a few bits and pieces with regards to one or two key components, looking at critical issues like, the fly ash in South Africa has $1.7 billion worth of rare earth elements in it annually. There's opportunities in terms of organic residues, waste to energy applications, looking at utilizing this marvelous material that has all this energy embodied in it. And then large scale reforestation, agroforestry applications in terms of sorting out climate change and ensuring food security in Africa. There's some massive opportunities. And I'd like to leave it there. I want to leave enough time for questions, but thank you very much for listening. I'll stop the sharing and I'll have a look and see if Vlad can sort out the questions for me there.
Oh, yes, thank you, Chris. Always very, very interesting content and very encouraging. I think me personally, I definitely feel a little bit at ease. Considering the recent turbulence and that caused by new U.S. administration. But at the same time, I totally agree with you. The train has left the station. So it's no, I don't think Trump alone will be able to stop it. And I think we're going in the right direction. That's why we're in this sector. We're supporting it. And we, as QPQ, from the funding side, always open to look at projects that require project finance. So you guys can see some links where I posted in the chat section where you can submit your projects for us to review and then hopefully eventually help you to get funding and realize those projects. We also, always look for referral partners. I uploaded Chris's presentation, our presentation in chat for you to be able to download. We have some questions to go through. So let's use this last, 10, 15 minutes to, basically clarify a few things. So I'll read out it to you, Chris. How do you foresee the recent funding cuts from USAID and European sources impacting sustainable development initiatives across Africa in the short and long term?
I think the short term we're going to see quite a dramatic impact because a lot of these development funds have been used in the past in terms of bridging finance on kind of de-risking projects, and I think that's the immediate impact that we're going to see. But what we are seeing at the same time is that we're seeing a ramp up in terms of impact investors and corporates trying to fill that gap. So I think that gap will be quickly closed. It is just a problem from our perspective in terms of understanding that there's always that gap in funding, and that gap in funding is from ideation to implementation, and that's always a difficult issue to fund from a great idea to a good project. And a lot of this kind of development funding and gap funding and grant funding has filled that gap. So yes, there's going to be an immediate issue around that, but as I said, I think there are others stepping into that gap, and that may take a while, but I would say that within a year we'll be back to normal. The gap will be filled, and I think we can look at those bridging finance and structured finance platforms coming from a multitude of different sources.
Perfect. Yes, we are also exploring various funding sources. We're bringing new DevEx source so that we're validating. So hopefully this is something that will help developers in early stages as well. So we'll keep everyone updated. So guys, as we still have questions, but if you have more, don't forget to post it as a Q&A so we can address them before we finish this session. So the next question is, in your opinion, is there a risk that sustainability becomes a luxury priority in times of geopolitical or economic uncertainty?
That's a very, very key question. I think obviously it depends on which side of the seat you're sitting on. This is also the reason why we created the African Circular Economy Network, was to create an African voice of circularity, taking our perspective in terms of the realities of living in Africa versus living in London or Brussels. They're very, very different initiatives, and I think that there still is an element of thought that this is very much an exclusive sort of arrangement, which really is for those who are more what was the word that you used, more advantaged with regards to that. However, I think that if we look at this from a broader perspective, I'm one of the people who says, let's not look at it as Europe trying to teach us how to suck eggs. Let's look at this as an opportunity to not make the mistakes of our northern partners. We don't want to be in a situation to be playing catch up in 30 years' time when we're now the bad boys because we've followed the wrong path. I think there's plenty economic opportunities in terms of investment around sustainability that are going to launch Africa and the developing South through the roof, to be able to manage the same sort of investment and growth without making the mistakes of the past. So it depends again which side of the fence you're sitting, but I would say that we need to look at this as an opportunity. I think we need to look at this as an opportunity to learn from the mistakes of the past, and to literally where we are from my perspective. I'm very much a technology enthusiast. Is let's look at those technologies that are there that can help us leapfrog those situations, and I think that's where there is so much opportunity. Understanding from your perspective and investors' perspective is that often because we have been blinded by vested interests of conventional systems, conventional banking, conventional construction, conventional transportation, conventional agriculture, it does dampen the innovations and the opportunities that are out there. So you need to dig a bit deeper to look for them, but there really are some great opportunities for investment.
Mm-hmm. And kind of following this topic and ensuring that African countries don't follow the wrong paths. How do you think African negotiators can better leverage forums like COP or the UNFCCC to secure climate finance and tech transfer?
I think it's critical that that they follow that path. And again, the opportunity from my perspective, and I keep coming back to the same thing, is that from my perspective, we're very much our African ministers go out there and go and sign whatever document they want. They don't really understand how they're going to implement that. That's a frustration and a danger from our perspective. But it provides a massive opportunity for the private sector to step into that gap and really fill that opportunity in terms of being able to meet those objectives, how to meet those NDCs, how to meet those CBAM targets. And I think that there's a huge financial opportunity there. If one can get it, again, understanding that the money that they get from the COPs and the IPCCs is really about looking at government funding. If we can just use that to increase capacity, knowledge, and understanding as to how to unlock proper additional funding in terms of project development, then I think we are on a winning path. But I think there's, again, just a massive opportunity for the private sector to jump in there and take advantage of that.
Right. So let's step away from Africa just for a moment. There are a couple of questions related to Latin America. Given the current political landscape, how do you assess investor appetite for renewable energy projects across Latin America?
I think it's still very fundable. I mean, to be honest with you, the reality is that people need energy and people are willing to pay for it. And willing seller, willing buyer. I don't think it's going to have any impact with regards to private sector funding around renewable energy projects. In fact, I think that is going to increase. The simple reality is that if we look at the aging infrastructure around a lot of the historic or legacy type infrastructure that's been there, South Africa is a prime example. Our infrastructure is 60 years old. It's collapsed. We need something different. So you can't be putting money into something that's broken. And I think that the opportunity in terms of particularly because we have a lot more sunshine than our friend in the global north, is an opportunity to invest into those applications. And I think it's going to increase. It might take a wobble while everyone's again trying to figure out what's going on in the world. But as soon as everyone figures out that things are all the same, that investment will continue to skyrocket.
Thank you. And what is the perspective on decentralized small-scale modular waste-to-energy plants in the US and developing states, as opposed to mass burn technologies in Africa or Latin America?
Yeah, I'm going to put that question out. That's a really good question. Yeah, I think it's we're going to look at it from two perspectives. I mean, the first thing is in America, bigger is better. Europe also has a very different system in terms of the fact that from a logistics perspective, they have centers that have high volumes. it does make sense to look at larger scale type systems. So you got to look at horses for courses in terms of where you're looking at this. What I think we're going to see is we're going to see a rapid development on small scale modular or containerized systems across the globe. We foresee it definitely in Africa, because if you look at the transmission infrastructure around the continent, it's simply not there. But if you look at places like Europe, there's a lot of opportunities using these small scale modular systems to be able to look at a factory or a retail center or an industrial center, that you can plug and play something in 400 or 500 square meters that'll provide 2 or 3 megawatts of power into that system at a cheaper level, and they're more in control of their own power. And I think that is going to escalate. I think we're going to see a rapid advancement of smaller scale systems across the world. It does make sense. It's cheaper. One doesn't need to look at plugging it into the bigger infrastructure. And a lot of the system development around that now, even in terms of funding, we're starting to see, for example, there's different Bitcoin things like the EDMA applications coming through now, which is tokenizing carbon credits that are coming off of solar power implementations, where homeowners can actually now link in and pull out money out of that system. So we're starting to see a whole change globally with regards to how these things are seen, how they're financed, and how they operate. But I think there's going to be a huge opportunity going forward.
All right. And next question is, what would you say is the biggest misconception holding back private sector investment in African green projects?
Two things. I think African green projects, one is the investability of those countries. And again, the problem with African countries is that they want to centralize energy because they see it as a long-term income, which I think is really bad, and that's a lesson we need to get away from. Because as soon as you decouple energy and sales, then you allow the private sector to come in and it provides much greater opportunities. I think that there is that issue in terms of dealing with African governments and in terms of the stability of the African governments. But I think there's a massive opportunity in terms of dealing in the global south with private sector clients as opposed to government sector clients that are the bigger users of that energy anyway. And that investment is definitely an option. In terms of the second biggest thing really is understanding technology. So it's technology agnotism or technology unawareness. That is a massive barrier to implementation of new projects. And again, I'll give you the example. One we're looking at now for the small island states is that we don't even want to try and tell the people we're selling what the technology is, because they don't understand it. All we need to do is give a guarantee that they're going to get the power, they're going to get it at this rate, and they're going to get it for 25 years guaranteed minimum, and this is how it's going to work. And then you pay us X amount of US cents per kilowatt hour, and that's the way that it works. So technology, knowledge, and investability, those are the two critical issues I'll see.
Great. And what sectors or types of projects are currently seeing the most traction from investors in Africa?
Strangely enough, agriculture. And this really has come across quite strongly in the last 3 to 4 years. There's a huge push in terms of food security, but also looking at doing it right, looking at regenerative agriculture, but looking at the entire agricultural value chain. So, we're not talking about just growing cassava or cabbages out in the communities. We're talking about opportunities to create processed products that have a longer shelf life, that have a higher export market opportunity. And that comes in with requirements around water and energy, and those all need investments as well. So agriculture, I think, is the big one. The second biggest, which I think is probably going to overtake agriculture, is energy.
Given shifting global priorities, how can African countries safeguard long-term sustainability goals from dawn of volatility?
They need to internalize. Again, we've been saying this for a long time, and maybe this is a check on reality that Africa has got to stop relying on grants and donations. They need to become more sustainable. They need to become self-reliant, and I think that that's probably one of the biggest wake-up calls or the scares in Africa and the wobbles in Africa at the moment. It's like, oh, South Africa is one example. I mean, they just pulled out billions in terms of HIV and AIDS support, which really the government should be doing. It shouldn't be an external government providing that support. So how do we look at these sort of things, really getting African governments to reflect internally and say, guys, we cannot rely on this free gravy train. We need to become self-reliant. We need to diversify our economies. We need to look at economically viable applications, and we need to provide the infrastructure and the support and the funding to make them happen.
Perfect, makes sense. And in terms of the carbon credits, so there is a question related to this. What do you think will be the impact of the new U.S. government position regarding the environment could be in the country, in the continuous availability of carbon credits and the like in the future investments?
I think we're going to see a wobble. I mean, the reality is, again, if you look at I think a lot of the big corporates in America are going to be taking a big, deep breath of relief. But if you look, a lot of those companies are operating in Africa, and unfortunately, if they're looking at getting their product into Europe or anywhere else, they need to follow CBAM, which means they need to follow sustainability. Carbon credits, I think, are going to take a wobble. We've seen that already. And I think that as people start to get past this uncertainty, it will stabilize again. And I think that if you look at the long term, the new Green Deal and the CBAM and ESG and everything else, I think it will increase in value for the foreseeable next decade or two. I think then we're going to see a corner turned, and that's going to change. But for now, I think there's a good opportunity in terms of carbon credits going forward. Obviously post the current wobbles where everyone's trying to figure out what's going on.
And last question, do you see the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, as a threat or opportunity for African exporters?
I think most of them are seeing it as a threat at the moment. It does need to be seen as an opportunity, and that's often what we do when we're talking to individuals in the sector, is to say, stop seeing it as a threat. Stop trying to find ways around it. Rather embrace it. Look at it as an opportunity to decarbonize. If that gives you an opportunity to save water, to save energy, to save input costs, to save resources, start looking at it as a business sense instead of it being this external threat. So it again is there's a lot of fear mongering. You've got to get rid of that fear. You've got to get rid of that that just lack of awareness. And we'll see that accelerate. I think the more people start to see it as an opportunity, in terms of, again, it's a reality check. This is the way the world's going. Let's just get compliant, but let's do it now and do it in a way that's going to be of economic value to our company.
Great. Thank you very much, Chris. Once again, it was a pleasure to have you with us today. I really appreciate you taking us through this and answering all the questions. Just one more reminder for people who didn't download the presentation. It's still available in chat. It will be sent along with the recording and the replay of this webinar to everyone who were not able to make it or left a bit earlier. And just remember, we're here to support you guys with project finance, with funding that's required for your projects. You can reach out to us directly, and we'll be happy to review your projects and hopefully support you and realize those projects together. Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes.